How do you feel about the Federal Reserve with respect to, do you think it's necessary or should it be dismantled? And do you think that the interest rates should be set by the market rather than artificially?
Well, absolutely. I hate to say this, but there are certain areas in which I'm relatively strong on my libertarian knowledge, and certain areas where I'm relatively weak. And probably when it comes to the Federal Reserve, and when it comes to the gold standard or hard money, I'm probably relatively weak in terms of my knowledge. And I also think that libertarian candidates, or anybody proposing non-trivial change to society, need to have their ducks in a row. So what I would say is the following. I think that gold standard should seriously be considered by the United States. I can't stand here right now and say, yes, that's the way to go, because there have been problems with societies, I know that have had the gold standard, and it's not perfect. But with respect to the Federal Reserve, I think that Congress should say the following to Ben Bernanke or any of his successors. Forget about interest rates, forget about the unemployment rate, you focus on one thing, and that is an inflation rate every single year of between 0 and 2% per year. Now, why 0 to 2%? Because actually with quality improvement in products, a 0% inflation rate could be disinflationary. And I don't think that would be a good thing, but it ought to be, you keep it between 0 and 2% or you're fine. That's it. And I think that having a strong currency, I think, is absolutely a requirement for long-term prosperity, maximum prosperity. So that's my reaction, is that I think the Federal Reserve wears too many hats, tries to please too many people. I think they ought to focus on making sure we have a strong dollar, a solid dollar, and that's it.
Yes, sir.
What's the Libertarian Party's position on the government's role in developing alternative energy?
That the government shouldn't have a role in alternative energy development. I think that I bet there are very few energy experts among the 535 people on Capitol Hill, and I don't see why they think they're experts. I mean, I bet that if you had even polled sometime, let's see, this is October, I bet about a month ago or so, 6 weeks ago, or during the summer, I wonder how many people would have, on Capitol Hill, among 535, how many people would have given any chance whatsoever that 87 octane gasoline would be selling below $3 a gallon before the end of October. I bet none of them would have thought that was possible. And they would be bemoaning, how bad things were and what we had to do with the American people, things like that. They're not energy experts. I think that the energy future should be left to the energy experts, and they're in the private companies. They're with ExxonMobil. They're with various power companies. I mean, who wouldn't want cheap, clean, abundant energy? We all want that. But the problem is that many of these alternative technologies, ethanol, for instance, it's bad economics with respect to energy, and you're using up soybeans, which have probably helped increase food prices. So I think the best energy policy is no federal energy policy. I think we ought to let the market work. I think that innovations will eventually come from that, and I think that's the way to go. Government getting involved in that market, just like any other market, is going to lead to political decisions that are going to be unwise.
Yes, sir.
This is related to that last question. Do you think the market tends to clear in ways that are economic or environmentally friendly in terms of energy or other fields?
Yes, I think ultimately so. I mean, I think that there are trade-offs. I mean, yeah, we could reduce emissions, but at a very steep price. And the whole thing is that, here's the thing. I highly recommend a book called Cool It by Bjorn Lomborg. Excellent book. And what it says is that yes, there is global warming, And yes, human activity has something to do with it. But there are so many ways, but also that there are some benefits from global warming. Longer growing seasons, in some places, things like that. But what it said was, there was one part that will stick in my mind. I believe it was United Nations sponsored, but there was a gathering where a lot of economists, including I believe 4 Nobel laureates, were called together to study what were the best investments in terms of progression of mankind, in terms of what were the best investments for the betterment of all mankind. And HIV/AIDS research, fighting malnutrition. There was another. There were 4 that were very good opportunities, and I believe malaria, fighting malaria was saying malnutrition, and HIV/AIDS research. What were the bottom expenditures right now were carbon tax, the Kyoto Protocol, and both of them actually 2 carbon taxes in the Kyoto Protocol. What they were arguing was that the problem is that a lot of these global warming solutions that are being proposed would be expensive to implement, would not reduce carbon dioxide emissions all that much. And if they harm the economy, that's just not just going to harm the U.S., it's really going to roll over on people in the developing world. And what they said was that those were some of the worst opportunities out there for the betterment of mankind versus some of the other things. So I don't have a clear answer to your question, but I do think that economics can never be set aside. I think economics is important in environmental decisions because ultimately we cannot impoverish ourselves and impoverish the world pursuing environmental solutions. There may be ramifications that may have negative effects, including negative environmental effects in the developing world.
This gentleman in the green, and then the gentleman, yes, sir.
What's your position on public education, especially at the university level?
I beg your pardon, public obligations?
No, public education.
Public education? I think there should be total separation. First of all, it's not a federal issue. I think that the federal government should not be involved in education whatsoever. Okay, I think the Department of Education, which I saw, I believe, like 4 years ago, was $62 billion. It's no doubt well more than that at this point. Should be zeroed out. There should be no Department of Education. There's nothing in the Constitution about it. It can be handled by state and local governments, private institutions, and individuals working cooperatively with each other. With respect to, I will go beyond that and say that I don't think there should be any government involvement in higher education. I think it's a perverse redistribution of wealth, frankly, to subsidize the educations of people who are attending universities from the society generally. With respect to K through 12, I think that the question of financing, to me, this is a state issue, but I'll answer it anyway. To me, the question with respect to education should be divided between financing and operation. I know people, good libertarians, who think that parents should pay for their own kids' education. They think it's a moral point. And I respect that. I understand the argument and I respect it. However, the one where I think it's most important is to get government out of the operation of schools. You can still have public financing through educational tax credits, through vouchers. But I just don't understand why in the world government has to run schools at any level. So that's my reaction. It's no place for the federal government to be involved in right now. Again, the Department of Education, we've had poor education results, worse than what we had before the Department of Education, yet we go on shoving money into that bureaucracy that we frankly can't afford anymore.